Hello again, welcome back to The Shed, and welcome to session 5 of 10 Things About Writing. Today we're going to think about characters and how to create characters that people will remember and care about. And remember that caring about the characters is key to keeping your audience, your readers, interested and engaged during the narrative of your story. Now, there are 3 kinds of characters, broadly speaking. In film terms, you've got your extras, who are basically completely flat characters who just appear to serve the plot. For instance, the ticket collector who takes your heroine's ticket as she's fleeing from her abusive husband, the nurse who looks after your hero when he's in hospital, this kind of thing. They don't have names generally. They usually appear just once and then they disappear and you don't think about them again because they're just there to fill in the roles that aren't served by other people. Then you've got your secondary characters who tend to have names, tend to recur sometimes throughout the plot. They're not as rounded as your main characters, but you would still recognise them, you would still expect to know more about them than if they were just extras. And then you've got your primary characters, among which would be your protagonist, potentially your antagonist if you had one, and you don't have very many of those. Those are your leads rather than your supporting roles or your extras. I'm going to talk mostly about primary characters and protagonists because these are the ones that require most work. And when you're writing a character, really you don't generally want to be thinking in terms of creating a character as an author. You want to think about how the reader is going to be experiencing learning about that character. So write as a reader is a really important tip. Write as a reader, write as you would expect to receive a story. And when I talk about rounded and flat characters, it's a very simple distinction. A flat character is somebody that doesn't grow throughout the story. A rounded character, you would expect them not only to have lots of aspects of their character to be discovered, but you would expect them to have changed between the beginning of their journey and the end, and how much they change, how much they are influenced by the people they encounter on their journey, the things that happen to them. That will determine how rounded your character is. Much of character creation isn't really creation at all. It is about noticing people. Good writers tend to be curious. To make interesting characters as a writer, you need to be curious about people. You need to watch people. Not in a kind of creepy way, but you need to be curious about why they do what they do, what happens in their lives. Remember that people, real people, are absolutely made of stories. Everybody has a story. People talk to me all the time. People tell me their stories all the time because I write stories. And when you're a storyteller, people want to tell you their stories. And I have collected so many stories from people who have begun the conversation by saying, "Oh, I'm a very dull person. Nothing ever happens to me." And then, little by little, they tell you something and you realise that they have an absolutely fascinating life, that they're completely unaware of this, because to them, it is just ordinary. And these are the things that, as a writer, you need to become aware of. So to be curious about the people around you is one of the great important steps in character creation. And by this, I mean curious about every kind of person. Somebody who writes well will be interested in people of different ages, different ethnicities, different cultures, different levels of physical and neurological capabilities. They will be interested in all sorts of people. Bad writers, and there are some very bad writers writing very dull characters out there, are only interested in themselves. You need to look further than yourself to create good characters, because somebody who writes about themselves all the time, or about somebody very like themselves all the time, tends to go stale very fast. Somebody who is curious about everything and everybody will constantly be replenishing their inspiration, their knowledge, their curiosity. So be curious Ask yourself questions about people, and you can do this all the time. You can think about people in your family. Think about their stories. Think about their personalities and why they do things. If you're on public transport, and right now many of you won't be, but look at strangers, look how they behave. Try to think about why they are, where they're going, what they're doing. You can work out a lot of things from just the way somebody dresses, the way they stand, the way they walk, the way they talk, whether they engage with people, how they behave when they're alone, how they behave when they're with other people. All of these will feed into the creation of your characters. Now, it all seems a little daunting, I think, to somebody starting off creating a character. Don't worry about this. Creating a character is like getting to know a person. You don't know everything at once. Sometimes it takes you a long time to get to know a person. And this is a good thing, because in a book, the last thing you want in a book is a massive info dump about your lead character's childhood and their past and their likes and dislikes and all sorts of things. You actually want to be eased into a story with something that will connect you with that character. And so you start small. You start with a few details, and then little by little, you can build in details. I would think that to create a good, rounded character, you need a minimum of these things. You need to know as a writer, and you don't necessarily have to tell the reader everything you know about a character, but you need to know enough about your character to be able to believe in them, to use their voice in a convincing way. And we'll talk more about voice later, but to have some idea of what they would do in different circumstances. So when the plot throws a whammy at them, you need to know what they'll do. You need to be convinced that what they do is something believable within the context of the character you've created. I remember doing a tutorial once for the Arvin Foundation with an elderly lady who was a widow, who sat in on my conference about characterisation. And she came to me at the end and she said, "Joanne, I've listened to you talk about characterisation and I kind of get it, but I just don't know how to do it." And she was a very good writer. She was extremely good at style. She had a very good understanding of plot, but characters defeated her. And so I said, "Okay, we'll do this." And I took a sheet of paper and I said, "Right, okay, I'm going to give you your character's name, John Smith. It's an extremely dull name. It is up to you to characterise this person and to make him into somebody that I care enough about to read a story about him." And so she sat there with her sheet of paper and I said, "Well, where does he live?" So she described his house. And she said, "It's a very neat little house. He's a widower. He's in his 70s. She too was in her 70s. That was no big surprise. He has a very neat little garden," she said, "with lots of bulbs planted in very neat rows." I said, "Okay, so far so good." She said, "He doesn't have a family that anyone knows of. He's very polite, but he doesn't seem to have friends." And she started to talk a little more about him. And then she said, "And do you know what? Every Thursday he gets a bus and he goes somewhere and nobody knows where it is." And then she looked at me and she said, "Oh my, have I created a character?" And I said, "Yes, you've certainly done that. You've made me interested in this man." And that's all you really need to do when you're starting off getting to know a character. You need to know a little something about them. A little something about the way they behave vis-a-vis other people. Perhaps something about where they live and how, because you can tell a lot about somebody by their surroundings, by the way they choose to live. It helps to try to walk in your character's shoes from time to time, to think about what they would choose from menus, to think about what they would like to watch on TV, to think about where they go during the day, how they dress, how they eat. I write a lot about food, and I think you can tell a lot about the way somebody eats, how they eat, whether they are frugal, whether they're greedy, whether they just enjoy food, whether they enjoy the sociability of food or whether they only eat alone, whether they have hang-ups about food, whether they just embrace the whole eating experience. All of this gives you insights into a person's personality. You need to know one secret about them that they don't tell other people. You need to know a little something about their childhood and their parents. Everybody is the result of their upbringing, so if you want to know more about somebody, you go into their childhood and their upbringing and you think, okay, how was this character formed? Who formed them? Who were the formative influences in their lives? How did that happen? And when you know these things, when you have some inkling of these things, then you can start feeling comfortable with your character and allocating a voice to them and trying to work out how they would behave in different circumstances. And you can play around with this. I would suggest, before you start writing a long story, play with your character a little bit. Write them in different scenarios, perhaps. Set yourself little writing prompts about, what would they do if they saw somebody being mugged in the street? How would they behave? Would they walk away? Would they try to intervene? Would they do something sensible, like call the police? How would they act? How are they with others? What kind of people do they hang around with, or are they completely solitary? Work out what they would notice if they went on a walk in the country, if they went on a walk in the town. Until you are reasonably familiar with the answers to these things, you won't feel comfortable inhabiting a character and telling a story with that person and knowing instinctively what they would do at every point in your narrative. And of course, the key to writing a character that will engage your reader is to find something that they and your reader may have in common. Now, this works with all characters. Characters that you're supposed to like, characters that you're not supposed to like. Sometimes we love to hate characters. Sometimes a character who is inherently bad is also engaging and likeable and interesting for the reader. You don't always have to make characters perfect. In fact, nobody really likes a perfect character. You need to embed flaws into your character to make them believable. Character flaws, things that maybe they are struggling with. Anybody who doesn't have a character flaw will turn off a reader simply by virtue of not being believable. So you work out the things that a reader may possibly recognise in themselves. A propensity to anger, perhaps. Shyness, perhaps. Some kind of damage. Everybody has damage. Try to work out what your rounded character's damage is. And obviously you don't deliver all this information straight away. You drip feed it through your stories so that ideally, as your audience is travelling with you through the plot, they're also little by little getting to know your lead character in a way that will make them know them better by the end and make them potentially want to stay with them for another story. This is especially important if you're writing a series. But it's also good if you're writing a standalone, because it means that if you've done it properly, that character will stay with your reader and they will want to revisit the story and they will carry them in their hearts and they will love them. And this is what we want, for your readers and your characters to engage and feel connected. Because remember, everything that you are doing as a writer, everything is about establishing a connection with your audience. And you do this through story, but also through the people that you choose to inhabit your story and to carry it through to its final conclusion. Thank you very much for listening. If you've enjoyed these talks, if you're enjoying the book, it would be nice if you put a review somewhere on Goodreads or on Amazon. That's always appreciated. Tomorrow I'll be talking about another topic, something that I'm not covering in the book. So join me then. Until then, I'll see you later.